with that, we're going to get started. And first up, I want to welcome to the podium to discuss Oregon's statewide land use program, Richard Whitman, who's Governor Kitsaber's Natural Resources Policy Director for the state. And we're very pleased to also have with us the Honorable Ted Gilagowski, who is the former governor of the state of Oregon. So if you both could step to the podium, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the panel. In 1973, Oregon, like many other states today and regions around this country, looking at their landscape, the trends for the future of Oregon's landscape at that time was not very good. Oregon's population was growing. Suburban sprawl was breaking out across many parts of the state, jeopardizing Oregon's fishery and timber industries. New freeways had been proposed through Portland's urban neighborhoods. When presented with these threats, a strong sense of place, which every Oregonian has, the legislature responded and created a statewide land use program that combined the bottom-up direction to communities and citizens to prepare and adopt comprehensive plans, along with a strong statement of matters of statewide concern, a set of statewide planning goals that set the frame for local solutions. Almost 40 years later, Oregon's land use program continues to provide a framework for citizens' involvement in our land use process, seeking to find local solutions to emerging challenges that together create a coordinated program that is bottom-up and statewide. The framework is being used for a range of contemporary issues such as economic development, climate change, urban expansion, forest and farmland conservation, public infrastructure, and competing ocean marine uses. Oregon, it has been said, is the closest thing America has to a deliberate place. That's true because Oregonians planned and built it that way by creating a shared vision of place and detailing how to achieve that vision in state goals and local comprehensive plans. The key innovation of Oregon's program is that it relies on both a statewide vision of high-level shared goals and bottom-up citizen-driven application of those goals in differing ways that reflect local values across the state. Those who have seen the arc for the past 40 years know that Oregon's program is not just successful, its innovation offers a valuable and proven resource for other states and regions facing the evolving challenges of their particular states and regions and their futures.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, members of the panel. Richard Whitman, Governor Kitsaber's Natural Resource Advisor. I'm going to dive right into it and talk about the ash selection criteria as they apply to the program the Governor just spoke to. Its significance, its effectiveness, how it's novel, and how it's transferable. The key thing about the Oregon Land Use Program is this interplay between local aspirations and broad statewide shared vision of the future about how we arrange our communities. The program started in '73, so it's been around a long time. But as new problems arise in terms of how we arrange our built and natural environment, the program adapts and addresses those new and emerging problems in ways that reflect both that statewide vision and those local aspirations. That's really why it's significant. In terms of effectiveness, three things stand out. First of all, in terms of conserving agricultural land for food production in Oregon, the state has lost virtually no agricultural land to development over the last 30 years. In contrast, in the United States, between 1982 and 2007, more than 23 million acres of farmland were lost to development. Here on the East Coast, some of your states have lost between 13 and 25% of their agricultural land over the last 20 years. The Oregon program also is effective at conserving forest land. Oregon is the top producer of softwood timber in the United States, so this is an important part of the Oregon economy. Again, almost no land has been converted from forest use to other uses. And finally, in terms of sprawl, you've all heard about smart growth. Oregon is known as a leader in the smart growth program and has really been effective at making efficient use of the land base. And importantly, that also means efficiency in public infrastructure, and it means in terms of environmental effects of urban development that those are reduced. In terms of the novelty of the program, I want to focus on just three quick things. First of all, planning for our marine environment. Oregon is a leader in the nation in terms of marine spatial planning, figuring out how to deal with competing uses between fisheries, recreational uses, and alternative energy development in the territorial sea. Urban and rural reserves, saying what parts of our urban areas are going to grow over the next 50 years, and importantly, what parts are not going to grow, so agriculture and forestry can make those long-term investments. And finally, in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, working with the major metropolitan areas in the state, integrating in land use and transportation planning to reduce use of vehicles, vehicle mile traveled. Oregon is leading the country in terms of its success in reducing VMT. So those are some of the novelties. In terms of transferability, just very briefly, it's important to note that the key thing is that interplay, and that interplay can work at regional to local level as well as state to local level, and we have seen that replicated around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Questions?
The question is a sort of twofold question. One is, how much flexibility do individual counties or local governments have in terms of complying with the overall statewide plan? That's number one. But number two, what recourse do individual landowners have to contest decisions that are made?
So in terms of flexibility, there are broad statewide goals, but those are adopted in local, county, and city comprehensive plans around the state. So there is latitude around the state to take somewhat different approaches in terms of how those goals in terms of resource protection are applied. That's an ongoing important dynamic in the program in terms of how much flexibility, and there's currently an effort to actually increase the amount of flexibility that's allowed in the program. In terms of recourse, Governor, do you want to talk about 37 and 49 for a second? Measure 37 and 49.
One of the lessons that I think we've all learned over the last 40 years is that this friction between property rights and the common good is always underneath the surface. And what we have to do is to actually continue to do a public education with the citizens of why we do this. And we make the assumption that it's almost like genetic in Oregonians' system, that we just normally adopt this, but that's not true because we have a large influx of population. And it came to bear on us in about 2005 when they passed a measure 37, which actually cut back and on the regulatory side and allowed the development of sprawl in areas. If you had a piece of property before the law became effective in 1973, you could revert back to that land use restrictions at that time and apply them to your piece of property today. When I was the governor, we put through, with Richard as the chair of a commission that I developed in my office, to have a measure 49, which undid the 37, but actually gave the citizens options of how they could actually proceed if they had a vested right before 1973. So there was a whole process. The court is working itself through that. And there is a structure within the department's administrative process where there's a land use board of appeal, which actually hears cases from citizens from across the country, our communities that have a concern about the application of the law. And then that goes up to our appellate process through the Court of Appeals in the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
I was really impressed that you're the #1 state in the country in reducing greenhouse gases. I was wondering how that happened.
So back in 1993, the state adopted a one of those broad statewide goals of reducing vehicle miles traveled. And at the time, it was really aimed not at reducing greenhouse gases. It was aimed at assuring that all segments of our communities have access to transportation and accessibility in their communities, access to jobs, access to social services. And so it was focused on community design and making sure that our communities are not overly automobile dependent. And so that policy has been in place for a long time. And as a result, the state has pushed the major metropolitan areas to really think about how they arrange where people live and where they work.
So it wasn't a focused goal,
Mo-
which to us, we thought that was very impressive, but the fact that you named it last in your presentation was interesting.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it wasn't really, it's a
It is
byproduct of the program.
It was a byproduct, an early byproduct of the program.
Yeah.
It is a goal in the state now, as in many other states, to
Right.
reduce greenhouse gases. But
That's
it was an
very-
early byproduct.
Yeah.
That's right.
The other piece that if I could just for a second, we have actually tied the planning process to our Oregon Department of Transportation and actually make them work together and actually communicate together about highways, about where we're laying concrete and trying to get people out of their automobiles. It is a statewide goal of the Climate Change Commission in Oregon to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And as you may know, we have a pilot program in Portland that is actually running right now, and it has run for a number of years, that actually has a system for vehicle miles traveled, so what you pay in the fees.
What do you say to a critic who would say, this really isn't replicable because A, Oregon is weird, and or, you know, and or B, it just took such a yeoman political level of risk-taking that no one else around the country is going to do this. How do you respond to that?
So it's important not to fall into the trap of thinking of Oregon's land use program, and I think the sense that most people traditionally think about it, the conservation of farm and forest land. The more important element is this interplay, and that interplay is working itself out in addressing new problems like the marine spatial planning, where we're working with local communities, fishermen, and cities on the coast, as well as alternative energy developers to work within a broad state framework to make that industry grow. So that particular effort is seen as one of the leading programs in the nation, is being looked at by other states, is also being looked at by the federal government as it develops a national ocean policy as a model for how to approach those issues. So it's replicable. I wouldn't necessarily expect you're going to see a lot of states adopt the whole statewide land use program, but you have 16 states or regions around the country that have urban growth boundaries that came from Oregon. And similarly, there are other elements of the program that have been adopted elsewhere.
Thanks. Other questions?
Yes, it seems to me that the greatest potential for conflict is not between property owners and the state plan, but between local government and the state plan. And is there a dispute resolution mechanism to resolve those issues, and how does local zoning and the statewide plan interact?
Let me just go back to '73. There was a lag period before the 19 statewide goals were finally adopted. At that particular time, the local governments were actually charged under the legislation to develop a comprehensive plan that looked at their local community and the needs they had, like commercial property, industrial, residential, all of these different classifications. I would be less than candid if I didn't tell you that there was a great deal of conflict with local governments originally in developing the comprehensive plan. It was not easy to do, particularly when the goals came out, and the goals actually set the framework where they were looking at their comprehensive plans. But over time, we have worked with them. We have programs that both provide technical assistance from the state side and from the department, and we give them grants to actually give them capacity, to actually get the expert staff they need and the resources they need to pay for that staff. So there was initially I think that there is general agreement in the state that the law works. The agriculture, forestry issues, particularly in our rural counties, are very, very strong. But I think most of the confusion or the conflict right today is the change between these measures I talked, which were on the ballot through the initiative process, 37 and 49.
Just one quick addition to that. So as director of the program, my closest partners are the cities and counties. They're the boots on the ground that implement the program. And if we don't have a good relationship with them, the program isn't going to work. So both for me personally, for the agency I work for, that is sort of job number one, is building that relationship with local government. Half of the agency staff is out in the field, not in the state capitol, working on a day-to-day basis with local government. So that relationship is just critical.
Other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm very impressed with what you've done.
So now we're going